Welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here to talk with you today about one or two of the chapters, the awesome, sometimes seemingly overwhelming chapters from this fabulous book by Dr. David Kilpatrick, Equipped for Reading Success. So it is my privilege to be the host of the discussion and do a little presentation today about orthographic mapping. And I know that can be an intimidating subject, so I hope that you are eager to learn about it. I hope I can serve you, and I also hope that you will participate, ask questions, encourage one another, share your answers. I'm not the only one here who knows about orthographic mapping. Some of you probably know more, so let's have an interactive time. That's the benefit of Facebook Live. So I'm going to say hello, then I'm going to introduce myself because people will probably be coming in different times, and want to make sure that we don't lose people. So welcome to everyone. Let me know you're here. Let me know this is working. I haven't gone live into this Facebook group before, so I'm going to see what's going on. Say hi, then I'll introduce myself and we'll get started. Okay, great. It is working. We have Donna here from Indiana, and Christy and Pam in Pennsylvania, Jennifer in Arizona, Nancy in Oak Park, Illinois, just down the road from me. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin right now. Jody in South Dakota, Christine in Amherst, Kathy from Florida. Most of us here from the U.S. right now. Happy Memorial Day. And who else is here? It looks like Tonya, sorry if I'm not getting it right, from Abilene, Kathleen in Delaware. Do we have any international folks? You guys got to show up. Lisa from Madison, welcome. Jennifer, thanks for that. That's helpful. Becky's from West Virginia. Okay, well, thanks for being here. Keep the questions coming. Of course, I probably won't be able to get to all of them, but I do want to serve you as best as I can. My name is Marnie Ginsberg, and I am a former classroom teacher turned reading tutor when I realized that I didn't know how to teach reading, and then I went on a hunt, found some things, and then I became kind of obsessive about how to teach beginning or struggling readers. That led me to go to the University of North Carolina and get my doctorate, and there I realized, oh, actually, we do know a lot about how to teach reading, and I just missed it in my master's, which is why Donna created the original, the mothership of this group, right? What I didn't learn in college, I was one of those people. And so I have been on a path to try to correct that for myself and for others, disseminating ideas about how to teach reading ever since. And so that's been about 20 years. Did that work at the University of North Carolina getting my doctorate, and strange thing happened. I was able to create an intervention that was federally funded at the time. Other folks got the grant money, and I was the one that was able to be in charge of developing it, and it was successful, and it continued to it's still getting federal funds to this day, even though it started in 2005 because it got effects. But interestingly, guess what happened? Got into journals. First journal article was the elementary school journal. Got effect sizes of 0.4 to 0.7, which is what John Hattie, who does a lot of excellent meta-analytic work in education across the board. He says those are the effects that make a difference educationally, and yet the articles just kept piling up and not a lot happened. Dissemination, getting the ideas out from research to practice, is a real issue. And so that's why it's so cool to see what's going on with this book and David Kilpatrick's other book, because he's getting some ideas out there that indeed have been undercover for far too long. So just to finish up with my story, I did that work at the University of North Carolina and was realizing this isn't really, it's great to have this research, but it's not making change in the classroom. When my husband had a job change, it seemed like a good opportunity to transition to something new, and now I'm leading Reading Simplified, which is just a professional learning community and training system for a more streamlined way of teaching reading for beginners or strugglers. So we serve teachers and parents, and I had the opportunity when I was, back in my doctoral program to read about Aries research, which really was the foundation for what Dr. Kilpatrick has put together in his books. But very few people were reading that and very few people were writing about it. So it's great that he's getting that out there today. And nevertheless, I think he's written about it so clearly, but we just haven't heard the idea of orthographic mapping in general, most of us, from other places. So we need to keep getting the idea out there because it's coming. It's going to come in direct contradiction with the mainstream way that we think about how to teach kids to read, how we think they should learn to remember sight words. And so if we understand the process of orthographic mapping, we'll understand the way that the mainstream recommends we do teach reading is wrong, inefficient, ineffective, and is probably, as Dr. Kilpatrick says, one of the main reasons we have such a wide gap. Up almost 65% of American fourth graders are not reading proficiently, and so he's putting a lot of the blame in the corner of us having confusion about how kids learn to read words. So let's get into orthographic mapping in a second, and I don't see any questions coming in, but thanks to Donna for getting this all started, right? Let's give thumbs up to Donna. She is amazing for being a powerhouse and getting ideas out there, building this community so we can share ideas. Okay, so the bad news is that I was prepping for this and 41 slides in my software program just disappeared. So that was about 5 hours ago, 4 hours ago, and I was pretty ticked off. And so what you're going to get today is a little less coherent than I would have wished. I do apologize. Just direct me if I go off track, and ask questions if I'm unclear. Also, I put together a summary sheet trying to follow Maria Murray's lead. That's an awesome idea. So you can find this in the files in the Facebook group, Equipped for Reading Success. So it's just 2 pages trying to recap the content of the 2 chapters. But there's so much that's really dense, chapter 4 particularly, both theory, research, and how to put it into practice. So we're probably not going to get it all done. But I wanted to kind of complement what he has done and try to address some questions I've already heard from you and see where there might be misunderstandings and try to emphasize what are the main take-homes that we should have. Okay, so let me just check what else is going on here. Barbara, she's a preschool teacher, but she's tasked with teaching sight words, so she's thrilled to learn more. Excellent. That's so important. If we can get our preschool and kindergarten children off to the right start, we will be a lot better off. As a reading tutor, I am always encountering children who have been given some inefficient strategies, and then it takes a lot of effort to overcome that. So again, I do like to have interaction with you guys, so let me know where I'm confusing, or let me know if you already know that. But I'm assuming some of us have read the chapter, thumbs up if you have, and some of us haven't. That's fine. So I'm going to give a little overview and also maybe a reinforcement. So Donna says, she always talks about, I don't know why I have this blue color. Let me just see if I can get rid of that. Oh, there we go. She always introduced orthographic mapping just by getting us to reflect on what do you think the term means? Let's get it cemented in our memory bank. So when you think of ortho, what do you think of? Just if you didn't know orthographic mapping before, what would be something that you would tie it to? Is there any word that you already know? What are you guys saying? Well, I bet some of you are coming up with orthodontia, right? And what are we trying to do with orthodontia? What is the orthodontist trying to do it? Sherry says she read this book twice. Yeah, me too. With the orthodontia, we're trying to get straight teeth, right? And so ortho is the Greek word that does indeed mean straight. Yep, there's Katie coming up with orthodontist. You guys are all about it. It's really about straight. The orthodontist is trying to make our teeth straight. So ortho, the Greek word, means straight. Graph is another Greek root word that means writing. And so you put them together and you have orthography. Everybody say it with me, because actually linking these things together phonologically with the print is known to help learning. Say orthography. It means the correct spelling, or if another way to think about it is it represents our written language, what we can see. So that's orthography, and we're going to dive more into orthographic mapping or orthographic learning. I'm going to probably use them interchangeably, but that is information about our spelling system that we learn gradually over time. It's learning about word parts and learning about words. So early on, we might learn about the a and all the places it can be an a, and then cat and that, and even the o sound. And then we learn chunks of spellings like ap and ing and pre, but then we learn more words, simple, and maybe other chunks like ohm, and chunks like pre and shun. And then we learn we're also learning words like vacation and shelf and distinguish. So this is a progression over time of our orthographic learning as a child or now as a reader. And this is a little bright, sorry, but, and again, the reason when I lost 41 slides, what we're getting together is a cobbled together piece of like 5 different presentations. So I apologize for the chaotic design. So Kilpatrick himself says, orthographic mapping is the mental process we use to permanently store words for immediate, effortless retrieval. So it's a storage process. And this is a big deal that we understand how this plays out, because right now, particularly in America, we are on fire for sight word and what we call sight word instruction. Let's get those words memorized in our kids. Let's get it done early. Some schools are saying you have to learn 25, 50. I've heard even 125, 150 sight words in kindergarten, meaning usually high frequency words, sometimes irregular words that we're asking teachers to make sure those kids memorize. And that becomes the goal for the teachers and the students. And while it's really great to have quick recognition of words, if we put that as our goal and we think of the means to get there as primarily a visual process, we're not understanding the research on orthographic mapping, and we're going to set up a lot of our kids for failure. So a lot of programs, what they're doing is emphasizing the look of words. Notice the TH is tall at the beginning and the and is tall at the end. And that emphasis on the visual is misguided, particularly for our kids that don't have phonemic awareness. So we're going to get to how phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping all relate soon. So yes, indeed, our goal early on is for words to be automatically recognized, and researchers call that sight word reading. That whatever the word is, whether it's something that may be irregular like was, W-A-S, or something that's regular like that, or cat, either way, if we see it, we in an instant recognize it and call it out. We have it stored. It's stored in our orthographic memory, actually on the left side. It's stored that way, and we draw it out. We retrieve it effortlessly. In fact, we can retrieve it in less than a 20th of a second. It's incredibly fast when we have words stored that way. But if we are starting not with the sounds in the words, which we'll get to soon, but we start with what they look like, then we're getting the cart before the horse. This is the way the mainstream culture kind of puts things into practice, because they don't understand the research on phonemic awareness. They don't understand the research on orthographic mapping. So a lot of approaches have a visual approach first. But if we start first with the way the words look and not tuning the kids' ears into, or their cognition into this perception of the sounds and words, then it's not an optimal starting point. So Kathleen is saying she's not clear on the relationship between oral speech and orthographic mapping. I hope that we're going to really pick that apart and it will become clear soon. But Ashley, thanks. That's great. You're making some good connections for her, so thank you. So when we look at our readers, it's very easy for us to be deceived, okay? Especially in the early grades, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. They may be reading, going along, everything seems fine on the surface of the water, but we can't see what's going on in their brain. And that's where the research about phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping really matters. The stuff that's hidden beneath the surface. So some kids may be reading the very same thing. Two kids reading, the cat is going swimming. The one on the left really doesn't get how sounds and symbols line up. That's why I kind of made that blurry. The child is maybe using context, maybe looking at pictures, maybe just kind of guessing based on the first sound in swimming and the picture, maybe having a partial code knowledge. The other child on the right, however, really understands how sounds and symbols match up. The cat, they get that cat is cat, and they get that swimming is two chunks of sounds or two syllables, swim, ing, and then with ing they understand it's ing, and going they understand that those are two chunks and that go is two sounds, go. They get how sounds and symbols connect, and that is the child on the right is going to be the child that's going to succeed in reading because he has used phonemic awareness to map it onto print. And he's understanding how our code really works. The child on the left is using poor strategies, and it looks okay from the surface, but it's really not going to be okay, right? That's like the shark down there. We don't want, it's hidden, we don't see it, and it looks okay for a while, but it's not going to work for a while at some point. The reason this is such a common misunderstanding is that reading seems like a visual accomplishment, right? I love how chapter 4 really does a great job of busting this myth. But this is the battle that we have today. People believe in this incorrect theory about word reading. People think on the left that learning to recognize words is an act of visual memory and that words as wholes can be memorized, and that's all you got to do. But we know from a long line, decades and decades of research, and now even cool brain scans that really confirm theories and research that have been building up for, as I said, decades, we know now that to learn words, you have to go through a phonological decoding approach or a sound-based decoding approach. Now, Dr. Kilpatrick uses phonic decoding as his term. Many researchers use phonological decoding, meaning phonological is our sound-based system having to do with words and language. So we use the sounds that we hear in the words to attack unfamiliar words and decode them and read those unfamiliar words. And that's the route for becoming a good reader. I prefer to use sound-based decoding because it's connecting that concept of phonological. We're going to get more and more into that we don't store words visually, we store them phonologically. So didn't you think it was cool all the ways he kind of just wrecked this visual memory belief? I just put up a couple of my favorites. One of my favorites is the word superiority effect, because this has been known for over 100 years. In 1886, a researcher, Cattell, discovered that when you put an he had some really early tracking devices with the eye, and you put up the word, say, chair, and you put up a picture of the chair, which one gets recognized faster? Do you guys know? If you haven't read the chapter, you might not know. Chair could be long, even if it's a word as long as elephant or perpendicular. You could put a picture of a perpendicular arrow, of perpendicular lines, and you could put a long word like perpendicular, but which one gets recognized faster? You guys, I know some of you know this. The word written out, chair. We see it much faster than the image of the chair. And that should have been an early clue to us that visual images we process them differently than how we process the words and the code. Exactly, Katie and Kathleen and Catherine, you are all over it. Yes, the word, we can read it so fast. And really, I think this is part of the miracle of reading. If we weren't able to read words in split-second time, it would be hard to get lots of ideas in a short amount of time, to get the comprehension, to understand the author's purpose. If we had to just read at the pace of chair, looking at the pictures of chair, and then looking at another picture, and then saying those, that would be a lot slower. So much slower that it would reduce our fluency, which reduces our comprehension. So it's really amazing that we can do this. What's another cool thing that busts the myth about visual memory? Hey, we have brain scans. We can see the good readers. They're using part of their sound-based processing. And the poor readers, unfortunately, they're often using the right side of their brain, and they're using some visual memory. And even more importantly, if the poor readers get training in sound-based decoding, what does their brain look like afterwards? It looks like the brain on the left. It looks like a good reader, and then suddenly they're using the part of their brain that good readers use. So we know we can change the brain through good instruction. And that also helps us realize that it's not a visual thing. Here's another compelling argument. Even if I was to give you, as Dr. Kilpatrick says, a wedding invitation with a fancy, crazy font you've never been able to read, after adjusting to it for a second, you would be able to read it, because the concept of the words you have deeply embedded in your orthographic memory, and they are concepts. It's not that you had to see that word in its particular array before. Look at all the different font here. You can read them all in seconds, right? Because it's not about the way they look. It's the concept of reading as being the word reading being broken down into a code of its sounds, in that particular order, R-E-A-D-I-N-G. All right, just scanning some of these questions. I may not be able to answer it all. Maybe some of you can keep answering them, because I want to get to some of the stuff about instruction. So Dr. Kilpatrick makes this case really well, and I think it's a really important, it's really powerful thing to take away from today and this chapter. We may feel as if we are reading from and memorizing words from a visual memory standpoint, but that is not right. That's what our intuition tells us, and that's what a lot of misguided reading educators are telling us in a lot of literature and a lot of university settings, but that is not based on science and some pretty obvious logic. Even brain scans. Indeed, we learn to recognize words not based on visual memory, but through orthographic memory. So if we are choosing approaches that emphasize the way the word looks, we're not building the right neural pathways. In other words, we're directing the child to the wrong spot. And back to the picture again of the shark and the fish, and you can't tell what's underneath the surface. Again, some kids may be reading early on and they can get by for a while, but like the brain on the left, if they're using visual approaches, it's going to end up, if they're not already there, it's going to end up being sluggish. They're going to be disfluent. They're going to be poor spellers too, very poor spellers. The brains on the right, they understand how sounds and symbols line up, that in turtles, there are the sounds t, t, z, and they map those sounds and those symbols. They orthographically map them. They get how the spelling maps onto the sounds that they hear in the words, and they're off to the races, and they're going to be better spellers. I know there are a lot of tutors here. How many of you can attest to the fact you get second, third, fourth, fifth, and above grade level kids come to you who you hear the parents say, well, they were doing okay at first, but then hit third grade and they suddenly just couldn't read very well. Most of the time it's because they were like that brain on the left, and they were using the wrong processes. We want to make sure that they don't use mostly visual cues, but they're making connections between sounds and words. So regardless of what type of curriculum you have, this is another take home. If we know that kids map words and memorize them to store them rapidly and to bring them back for quick, effortless retrieval later, through a sound-based approach. Make sure that that's the way you lead in your teaching. And even if you have something that it doesn't emphasize it, you emphasize it. Okay, what's that sound that you hear at the beginning of fly? You can still draw their attention to that regardless of their curriculum, of your curriculum. Here's another way to think about how these pieces fit together. This is Seidenberg's, let's see if I got his book. Mark Seidenberg's very well-known processing model for word recognition. And this is in this book, Language at the Speed of Sight, which has a lot of overlap in the content and the concepts of how we learn to read, emphasizing, again, this is not a visual process. So meaning, spelling, and phonology, that's how we store our words. Those are the things that we build neurally. We build all these connections among these parts of words. So like if you think of the word cat, that's its meaning. We think of an animal. If you needed to pull on context, the context of that might be, say, the cat is playful. And that helps you with words like wind, which could be wind a string around your finger, or the wind was blowing. But let's get really into the reading part. Reading, then, you need to rely on the phonology, the sounds you hear in the words. So children, even if they haven't read yet, they know the meaning of the word cat, and with a little bit of coaxing and instruction, they can be guided to perceive the sounds in cat. K, at, that's phonology. But that's oral, right? And it has nothing to do with print. So we need to get to be able to read words. We need to make connections from the phonology to the spelling. And the spelling is another, remember, that's really orthography, correct writing. The correct spelling of cat is C-A-T. So how does the child put all those things together? The important part of how Chapter 3 bridges into Chapter 4 for our equipped book is that it's through the route of phonemic awareness. So phonology goes to spelling or orthography, and through that connection of sounds and symbols, words get stored, they get memorized. He talks about it being unitized. So cat is no longer just k-at. Once it's orthographically mapped, it's stored, it is a unit. The eyes see it at a glance and see the letters in a particular order, C-A-T, and the child immediately recalls that that C-A-T is the meaning of cat. And all of this is synced. Probably won't say sunk, right? What do our kids have as the most important missing skill many times? Phonology. If children are naturally weak at perceiving the sounds in words, then they don't make the leap from k-at to C-A-T. And that's why Chapter 3 is so important. We have to understand the value of phonemic awareness, because that is the route through which the words get memorized. Just trying to scan. You guys are doing a great job with the comments. Vicki says it's so eye-opening, and Kathleen agrees with Seidenberg's book. It's a great book. And Sherry says it's her next read, right? The Language at the Speed of Sight. Okay, we're going to get to morphology a little bit later. Frank, good question. So let's break this apart a little bit more in case this is confusing to you. So I'm sorry about my renegade T there. That's not what I meant. The T for boat is supposed to be where you would expect. But let's say your beginning reader is looking at the word boat. And to get her to decode the word, she has to notice the phonics elements. She has to notice there's a B, and she has to notice there's an OA, and she has to notice there's a T. But to complete the phonic decoding, sound-based decoding process, she needs to not just notice those visuals, she has to connect them to sounds that she already hears in words. B-O-T. She does that, blends them together, and she reads the word boat. That is sound-based decoding. Most of the people that are in the what I have learned, what I didn't learn in college science group, are moving towards this. If they weren't there already, a sound-based approach to decoding. That process that we just talked about, that is sound-based decoding. See the word, see the parts, connect it to the sounds, and then you're able to decode the word. That is a process that we must go through, usually about 1 to 4 times, either reading the word or spelling out the word, or doing something active with it, like writing it, connecting sounds and symbols. A typically developing reader can see that word or spell it accurately about 1 to 4 times, and then guess what happens to that word? Because that process happened, that word becomes potentially orthographically mapped. So the route to get the word memorized is a sound-based decoding approach, what Kilpatrick is calling phonic decoding. The orthographic mapping is the outcome, the reward of the process that the child had to go through. So when we're teaching reading, the process early on for kids who are learning to read is primarily the process, the act of us getting our students to code break. We have to help them see how the code works and to help them attack it from a sound-based decoding approach, and they have to do it with sufficient practice. See the words enough times that they become orthographically mapped. They become a unit, so that as soon as the child sees boat, B-O-A-T, it is recognized, recalled, and fluent reading is, for at least that word, is not a problem. And this is why Chapter 3 bridges into Chapter 4. The process of getting to the goal of orthographic mapping explains why phonemic awareness is essential for reading development. Orthographic mapping is basically the gluing process. You might think of the phonemic awareness and the print as the Velcro. If the child doesn't have the perception of those sounds, they're missing that whole section of Velcro, or it's maybe a really loose, worn piece of Velcro that's been overused, and so there's nothing to hook. So phonemic awareness is so important so that the child can go through this process of sound-based decoding to memorize those words. This is, I think, connected to what Louisa Moats wrote about in her article Teaching Decoding, which led probably to her book Speech to Print. She said, we should teach speech to print. In other words, phonemic processing, phonological processing to spellings. First we start with the sounds, not starting first with the visual. She said one of the most fundamental flaws found in almost all phonics programs, including traditional ones, is that they teach the code backwards. That is, they go from letter to sound instead of from sound to letter. The children already have the sounds and words. They are already knowledgeable about most of the words that we're asking them to read in kindergarten, first and second grade, right? So that's why we want to start with what they know, draw out their knowledge of the phonemic properties of the words that's not natural to them, particularly if they're, say, one of the 30 to 40% of students who are just naturally weaker at it, like some people are weaker at singing on key. And so I'm going to take a break and see what the questions are here, because I've packed in a lot. What is the capacity for, oh, interesting. I don't know the answer to that. Thanks for the link there, whoever popped that in. That's very helpful. That's from the American Federation of Teachers. It was a great article. It's free. You know, the interesting thing about orthographic mapping is we have a much more, it seems like a greater storage capacity than we do for visual images. So recalling visual images is, we have a more finite bank, and we're also slower at it. So I do think we probably do have a pretty limitless ability for new letter strings, as long as they connect to a code. If they are just XPTRE, That is meaningless. That's one of Kilpatrick's important points. Our written language is a code for sounds, and the letter strings aren't random. And that's why the visual part is kind of irrelevant. We're tying it to the code breaking that we've already done. Janelle, I couldn't agree more. Yes, we shouldn't have gotten to this point. You guys are part of the movement to change it, right? Just scanning see if I can answer questions really quickly. Thank you for encouraging one another. Yes, Kathleen, it's where it's stored. It's getting stored. It's really the outcome, orthographic mapping, that is. Yes, Sherry, good point. The specific sequence. The word boat is not, it's meaningless to me if it's O-B-T-A, right? It's because of the sounds in boat that I make sense of B-O-A-T. Yeah, some of you are helping out with the storage versus the processing part. That's great. I was thinking of this analogy today. I'm not sure it works. Let me know what you think. Because some of the questions in the Facebook group were, how can I teach orthographic mapping? And I almost think we can't. I want to just put this in, something I'm going to propose. I don't think we can teach orthographic mapping. I think we can teach sound-based decoding and give abundant opportunities for practice and breaking things down, reading and spelling, but it's the brain that does the mapping. It's like you can teach a child to ride a bike by helping them hold the bike, giving them some tips, running alongside them for a while. You can certainly help them with the process of practicing being on a bike, but do you teach them how to balance? I mean, you can't really teach them how to balance. That's the brain's work. Does that make sense? So that's why the sound-based decoding part is so important, for us to be aware of what our students' skills are and to teach that, encourage it, make sure they're going through that process so that the brain can do the work of orthographic mapping. It's important for us to understand how the words get stored, but I don't know that we actually teach them to store them. We can just display them. And help them manipulate them and do all sorts of, certainly we can help them get to that spot, and we do. But it's really that we're helping them sound-based decode, we're helping them spell, we're helping them practice their reading and make sure it's accurate, we're helping them pay attention to print. And so then they do the work, and the outcome is orthographic mapping. Kathleen, yeah, your mom or your dad, they probably didn't do the balancing, right? Your brain had to do that somehow miraculously. Okay, Vicky, okay, so I'm not going out on a limb here. Vicky says, yes, we facilitate the process. That's helpful. Brenda, thank you. You're helping me put these into words. Through explicit teaching, we enable orthographic mapping to happen. Heidi, this is a great controversial question, so thanks for teeing me up. For beginners, I would generally say they typically don't need nonsense words for the beginning part of their instruction because they have ample real words to read. And as I think you pointed out in your Facebook post, or someone did, since the orthographic mapping is paying attention to the real words and noticing those real letter strings, why would we want to show them something that's not real when we have an opportunity to learn the word red? Don't give them Z. There are times, however, that it can certainly be helpful, and in the program that I developed, Reading Simplified, I actually explicitly encourage teachers to use nonsense words for advanced phonemic awareness and advanced phonic decoding. But that's because they're not beginners anymore, and that's one of the places where we use it for one of our phoneme manipulation activities. It's a word building, word swapping type of activity. We call it switch it. And as they get further and further along the continuum of their ability to do that, like at first they start from sat to sit and sit to sid, and so forth. Then they get from 3 sounds to 4 sounds, 5 sounds, 6 sounds. So if they do stomp, stamp, stump, and that's too easy for them, then we might go, well, how do you switch strand to, that's just a real word, to strond, to sprond, to spront, to sprunt. And so there's a purpose for that, to get to that advanced phonemic awareness level, which Kilpatrick is going to be talking about later. The other benefit of the nonsense words is to help you figure out, of course, whether the child's sound-based decoding skills are intact. We're going to talk about that if we have time. And then for the mature reader, it's a great, or I shouldn't say mature reader, like a reader who's still struggling, who is older. They have a lot of bad habits, and sometimes the nonsense words can help alleviate those bad habits if they're not paying attention to all the letters that are in front of them, and you're helping them to blend the sounds continuously, which we call blend as you read, or you want them to read every chunk of a word, then a nonsense word can be helpful. But I think it's a great thing to be aware of, that the nonsense word will not help with orthographic mapping in that moment of a real word. It may help the process of sound-based decoding, but we're probably going to minimize it if the sound-based decoding is coming along. That's a great question. I like this, Tiffany, thank you. We do the teaching, the students' brains do the mapping. The more efficient and appropriate our teaching, the better conditions for the student's brain to orthographically map new words. Exactly. Okay, so one of the things that's important with orthographic mapping is how things vary over time. And this is also why we get confused about what seems like it's visual, right? So early on, the student has to do phonological decoding or sound-based decoding. They have to map sounds and symbols, but you and I, we're not doing that. We are rapidly automatically recognizing words. So the beginner is on one end of that continuum, and mature readers are on the other, and so we see this tension, and it can confuse us. But basically, here's another way of thinking about it. When our students are early on in the process, they are very active in the phonological decoding part of, and this is the process that gets those words mapped, gets them stored, gets them unitized. But once they are unitized, once they are stored orthographically, then we recognize them automatically and we're proficient readers. On the other hand, when we see a strange medical word like coronavirus, maybe we've never seen that before, we might have to pay more attention phonologically and sound-based decoding wise to the different parts in those words. And another thing that happens as we're going through this process from beginner to mature reader is we are getting better at phonemic awareness the whole time. Reading is a really great way to improve phonemic awareness because it's not really an end in and of itself. As you learn the word boat, and then you get to the word float, you get a little bit better with your processing, the 3 sound words to the 4 sound words, because the print is like an anchor for that information. Okay, so I want to show videos, and I want to talk about, again, the progression, because I think this is where the rubber really hits the road. I've got 2 things. I don't want to take too long, but this is obviously a huge topic. Just one more quick analogy, and then we'll get into the progression of reading development and show some examples of how your sound-based decoding construction leads to orthographic mapping. Okay, so this is a little visual that I thought might help you. How are our kids going to get started to become good readers? They have to have letter sound knowledge and phonemic awareness. That's what gets them started. But how are they going to get to the other side of having automatic word recognition and then even further down the path becoming really fluent with all those words that they're building? Well, the only route to get there is sound-based decoding, which is what we've been saying. Successful readers all follow the same route to get to the other side of automatic word recognition. That's the only route to get there. That's the amazing thing that our brain does. It's in a small little area and on the left side. And you can read some fabulous stuff about brain scans from Stanislaus Dehaene, like Reading in the Brain. And he also has great videos that you can see on YouTube to get to get more information about this process. What are our reading programs by and large doing these days? They're trying to bypass that. Have you seen that? Let's just memorize the way the words look. We can get to the other side. Again, this ain't going to happen. This approach will fail the student. It may work early on because we can memorize 100, 300, maybe even 1,000 words visually only, but we cannot learn them without that Velcro that I was talking about, hooking sounds and symbols, when we need to learn 30 to 70,000 words to become good readers. So the students are doing this all the time. Every time they learn a new word, like they learn boat, and then maybe tomorrow they learn float, they're going through a sound-based decoding route. Boat becomes automatic, but float is not. They got to go back through the cycle. They have to decode it. And they get better and better at the process, however. What are they able to do? They are able to notice those more and more word parts like ing and I and ud. As they're learning words, they're also learning word parts. So that helps them. This is where that question about morphology comes in. We have to make sure, I think, that the research indicates that the morphological emphasis should be when the kids are at that consolidated alphabetic stage that Ari talks about. So back to this point, I wanted just to give you a little case study. I know many of you who tutor, or maybe even in the classroom teacher, you've seen this all the time, especially the upper grades. Middle grades, it's crazy. And here is a student who was in high school, 10th grade. And he came to me and his mom had just discovered he had dyslexia. Look at his non-word decoding. It was first grade, 8th month. He's in 10th grade. He can't even attack unfamiliar words like a second grader. So that is the sound-based decoding. That's the route across the bridge I was talking about. Somehow he had managed to memorize words with this hackneyed sound-based decoding system that was very fractured, and so he could recognize words about at the 37th percentile. So sometimes people might even think that that was average and he was getting by, but the system was really broken down, and so he was low average reading rate. He's only comprehending at the 5th grade level. With intervention, the non-word decoding went straight up to 10th grade level, and his reading comprehension went to the college level because he had been blocked by the sound-based decoding. Fundamental problem, that's at the foundation of everything. The sound-based decoding is what the word identification is built upon and what fluency is built upon and that what comprehension comes from. So that was a very clear block. He'd kind of hobbled along, gritting it out, memorizing a lot of words with only partial information, but just giving him the code, giving him some phonemic awareness, and he rocketed ahead. And so that's just an example. You can't skip past it. That's just a case study, but we have data from that. So to get us to hopefully some examples of instruction, let's talk about Ari's phases of sight word development. These are not exclusive phases, and we don't have to keep kids lockstep in them. They're overlapping. So the pre-alphabetic is when they don't necessarily understand the alphabetic principle that our written language is a code for sounds. They don't know phoneme awareness and they don't know letter sounds. We want to get our kids quickly out of there into the partial alphabetic. And let me give you some examples. So maybe you're going to just build a CVC word like sat. That would be a partial alphabetic phase. But after they get pretty comfortable with that, then we can move them into learning more about the code, like the long vowels. Like there's an example of the O sound in the middle, and so kids are reading O sound words but sorting them by spelling. O-A, O-W. That is more into the full alphabetic stage. And then once they get into the consolidated alphabetic stage, they know a lot of word parts and a lot of words. They can make decoding by analogy and by noticing parts like OA or OAM or OAT. Those parts, PRE, TION, those parts are more automatic to them. This is part of their orthographic learning, and so they can pull upon them to decode. And so then we're going to do more multi-syllable work, and we're going to maybe emphasize prefixes and suffix and stuff like that. Dana says that story is sad. It's tragic. I mean, this is in my district, and they don't recognize dyslexia. It's kind of crazy. He had to get that help from outside the system. So these things, like the boys' problem, they are often hidden, particularly for those of you who work with kids who are upper grade level. They can hobble along with partial word identification skills, but they can be hiding a problem. And I find most of the time kids are hiding a problem. So I always encourage you, if you have a new student in any upper grade level and they're not fluent and they're not comprehending really well, assume at first that you need to check to see if the sound-based decoding foundation is not there. And a nonsense word test is really good for that. Because it shows, do you see how sounds and symbols match up? Because you couldn't have memorized that word before. Also, the past test in here, which I forget what it stands for, but you guys know what it stands for. That's a great sign. If they don't have advanced phonemic processing, then they probably aren't able to do sound-based decoding. So those are both ways to figure out, this is a problem. We have the foundation is poor. We have to shore that up because they can't get to the other side of the bridge, right? To orthographically map all the thousands of words they're going to have to map if they don't have that. And here is from Keith Stanovich, if you're not convinced. He's one of the premier reading researchers, and he's the one that came up with the Matthew effects concept, but a lot of other really important reading discoveries. And he says the speed of naming pronounceable non-words is one of the tasks that most clearly differentiates good from poor readers. So there's incredible potency of pseudo word reading or nonsense word reading as a predictor of reading difficulty. So check that out if you have a kid that's not reading well. By and large, especially in our culture today, when they don't typically get phonics and they don't get sound-based decoding getting them tuned into phonemic awareness and mapping those things together, it's often the problem. So as you go from here, think about, for any time you have a student with a reading problem, ask what's their approach to reading. Do they have a strong sound-based decoding approach? So now I want to get into some activities. There's a lot of different activities that are valid and research-based that would be emphasizing the sound-based decoding foundation. I'm going to show you some that I happen to have access to, but what's really important is that you're noticing what the child's skills are. You're pushing them to develop more phonologically and more in terms of their decoding and their phonics, and they're getting a lot of practice, and they're getting guided practice where you coach them to become better and better at their sound-based decoding approach. And you do it, as Kilpatrick says, in light of where they are in Aries stages. Okay, so we're going to show basically some of these examples. Okay? Interesting. Frank says a kid with good nonsense word fluency, comprehension, but horrible phonology. What did you mean by, you did like the past? It'd be interesting, was the nonsense word test, was it not timed? If it was timed, it's probably not something that would have come up strong, because some kids can have good phonics and they can stumble their way through, but if it's timed, then if they are not quick with the phonological processing, they probably can't be quick with the nonsense word decoding, I think, and then if you really got both of those things going on, then that does stump me. I'd need to think about that for a while. Yes, I think so. Yeah, the tower, I agree there. Dr. Kilpatrick has been recommending the tower. Sorry I'm not able to add add your comment, Beth, but she's talking about the tower, the test of word reading efficiency by Torgerson and team. Okay, so let's start out with the beginning kid that doesn't know the code, doesn't have phonemic awareness, doesn't have the letter sound knowledge. That's the partial alphabetic phase. We want to get them as fast out of the pre-alphabetic as we can, where they don't even understand the code, and we want to get them more rapidly into the full alphabetic code as fast as possible. So I'm going to show you an example of a simple word building activity. Notice if we're linking phonemic awareness with phonics and decoding, and if this will allow later down the line for orthographic mapping. So we're going to show a little example of a 4-year-old, like one of his very first activities in reading. We can always edit it out. Okay, so I just want to play some games with sounds. Okay, how does that sound? A short little game. We're going to make a word. Let's make a word like...
How about my name? It's easy.
That's a good one, but I don't have all those letters. So how about we try mat, like to wipe your feet on the mat. Okay? So if I was to listen for the sound at the beginning of the word, mat, what would I hear here at the beginning of mat? What do you hear at the beginning? I think you're right. Now look carefully. Which one of these is That's it. Now pull it down and say You did it. Okay. Let's try the next one. What is the sound that you hear right here when I say mat? You have What's here in the word mat? I hear ah. Do you hear ah right there? Yeah. Mat. You hear that ah?
Yeah.
Can you say ah?
Ah.
Okay, now think carefully. Which one do you think is ah? That's ah. Pull it down, say ah. You're almost done. Look, you've already built ah. You have the beginning of the word mat. But what goes over here after ma? We need something over here.
I don't know what it is.
Okay, let's listen. Listen. You have mat. And we're going to build the word mat. Mat.
I hear a T.
I do too. What sound is it?
A T. But
what sound comes out of my mouth? Mat. What just came out?
I don't know.
Can you copy what I did? Mat. You said the letter name, but what sound is it when we see this? When we see this, we say, can you say, look at what you did. Did you know you could build a word? You said you didn't know how to read, but you just built your first word. Look, you built the word mat. Okay, let's check the sounds. Mat. Now your turn. Let's do it together. Nice job. So that was an example, obviously, of a kid very early on, could barely do anything without a lot of teacher support. That's at the earliest of the partial alphabetic stage, connecting sounds and symbols, learning all of the systems of reading, and getting the concept of the alphabetic principle. But you can continue to do those things that prepare them to be able to orthographically map and just continually expand their knowledge of the code and expand the progression of the difficulty of words. So from 3 sounds to 4 sounds to 5 sounds. So I might do something very similar with a older student with 5 sound words. Let's change stomp to stump. Right there was just building it, but move it even harder to get to that phonemic manipulation level. There's connecting sounds and symbols, and it's going to help them see how the code works, and they're going to develop a strong sound-based decoding foundation. And so we ease into it, considering where they are, and then we increase the challenge. So then we start to move into things where their phonics is a little more challenging, like the O sound, like in that middle picture. They can do the O sound. It can be the OA or the OW. I'm going to show you an example of a student who's just now moving from short vowels to the long vowels in this case. And notice when he's asked to find the word that has the same spelling as maybe say the O in boat, he has to look around for a little while. Why is that? Because those aren't memorized yet, or they haven't been orthographically mapped. So he's in that early stage of making these connections. So this is one of many, many examples of how you could teach sound-based decoding so that the student is well prepared to orthographically map. If I can pull it up. So we call this activity Sort It. So it's a struggling reader in first grade who's just getting his first taste of moving from short vowels to advanced phonics and all those long vowels. I have a secret sentence to to tell you to help you remember the O spellings. Go home to show the boat to Joe. Okay, here we go. What is he doing?
Sailing.
Yeah, he's going on. He's looking for Joe's house. What's he gonna do? He's gonna go home to
the boat to Joe.
So we take that key sentence that helps you remember all of these spellings and put it up here. Go home to show the boat to Joe. Then we have all of these spellings. You see them?
Mm-hmm.
And what are all of those spellings? What do all of those spellings have in common?
A-O.
They're all what sound?
O.
Oh, okay. So what you get to do is read a word and then decide where it goes.
Okay, let's go, go, go.
Just read it first. What is it?
Go.
Go. Where does it go?
Then.
Okay, so in this white space, write go and say the sounds as you do.
G.
No?
Wait. Good.
That's it.
O.
Good, good. Okay. Let's try this one.
O. Show.
Mm-hmm. You will show me where it goes. Just focus on show. Which one of these spellings? There you go. Okay, say the sounds as you do it.
O.
Nice. This one. So he's a little further on, but it's still kind of sluggish. And did you notice how he's saying the sounds as he writes them? So if he was to write the word show, he would say shh, oh. Why would we want to do that? It's actually trying to encourage his brain to orthographically map, right? It's saying, this is the sound I hear and show. Let's match on the print to it. It's a shh. It's not an SH because that's not its sound. The sound is sh, and the sound in show at the end, the O, is that OW, but I'm going to say O. It's so, I'm not making him orthographically map, but I'm trying to lead him to the possibility to make it more simple. So then a student gets further down the path, of course, right? We want our students to not just learn advanced phonics and all these tricky long vowels, but then we want them to get better and better at attacking multisyllable words, and we want them to also notice more and more chunks in words like the ing, tion, pre, pre. And so I'm going to show you two examples where you could do this and then call it a day. I'm sorry I haven't been able to answer your questions. You guys are awesome. There's so many. I will try to answer some of the comments, questions in the comments, but I know a lot of you are encouraging and answering them, so that's very helpful. It's been a very dynamic group. And as I said, if you weren't here at the beginning, I lost all my slides, so it wasn't as orderly as I would have liked. But here is read it at the multisyllable level, focusing on one particular sound and its various spellings, the ol sound, and then tricky ways they can be spelled at the end of words. Notice here that we're talking about the what ending? The ol. And notice all these ol spellings. Did you know that there were that many? So I put that work over here. We've got the different ol spellings, and I want you to bring your word cards up here. We'll just read them, and you can sort them by spelling.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Useful. Material.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about my orange material for the backdrop?
Orange.
Yeah, it's very orange.
Special. Tunnel.
Have you ever been through a tunnel?
Yes, many. Simple.
Is that right? So the activity is trying to encourage him to notice the different spellings of ol, to get those to become units he orthographically maps with those various words, but it's not a guarantee that it'll happen, but we give him the opportunity, we break things down, make him sort in a way that pays attention to the spellings, but then maybe we need to do something else to get it to be reinforced, and that's where reading and spelling, particularly after they get past that really laborious stage where everything is so hard in pre-K and kindergarten to write, we can get them to write more to facilitate their sound-based decoding and then potentially make things orthographically mapped. So the same sound, l, and the activity write it. I'm going to show you two things. I'm going to show you how he's practicing how to write the word and trying to learn the spelling as he goes, but then also at the end we're going to break it apart phonemically. So even though you're at that level, the consolidated alphabetic stage, where you're going to be looking at words by chunks and noticing those larger units, you can still go back to the phonemic level, and that's a way of helping the possibility of orthographic mapping, because it's at the sound-based level that it's going to get stuck, right? That's what we've learned very clearly, that it's phonemic connections to spellings that is how we store words. So this is a writing activity, sort of a dictation with the L sound words for multisyllable. We've got these ul spellings, and I'm going to give you some ul words and see how many you can get right. Okay, let's try example. Write it in chunks. You don't have to write it underneath it. Just write it.
It's so hard because all of them sound the same.
Yeah. Say it real loud.
Oh, I think it's an E.
You're right. Yeah, you got it. Next time, leave spaces between the chunks, okay? Let's try travel. I will travel to North Carolina.
Travel.
Very close. So close.
Travel.
Travel. But you got example. Travel. That's what it looks like. You say a little louder.
Handle.
Good.
Oh, wait, would that be it? Terrible.
Now look at the It's all
Would
one.
it be?
Yep, 3 letters. Funny, isn't it?
Weird.
It's kind of unusual, but
Yeah,
it does
that's
happen.
strange.
Animal. So did you see there were working at that consolidated alphabetic stage where, yeah, the student is starting to see chunks and words, but also we're going to go back to the phonemic level. Make sure that, particularly the student has has some significant phonological challenges, so we're really always going to make sure that they're mapping phonemes to spellings. So we have covered a lot, but I know there's more to cover. I'm sorry that we couldn't get everything. There are so many different ways to teach sound-based decoding. I think we're on the cusp of what are some of the fastest ways to do that. That's one of the topics that Mark Seidenberg has been talking about lately. I wanted to also plug the really great reading site. They have heart words. This is for those high-frequency words, like the Fry high-frequency words. They are pointing out here with this activity, these videos, that those supposedly irregular words aren't that odd, and as Kilpatrick points out, we still orthographically map them to the sound, that the in said it's a funny spelling, but we still know it as and we're linking it with the AI, and so they have other words like, have and give and whatnot. So there's a lot of different things you can do. We can't explain everything. I wanted to point out one thing, that chapter 4 was really amazing for giving us the theory and the research. That's really a slam dunk case. We have so many pieces of evidence, right, that it should have been pretty compelling, and I hope I added to that, or at least complemented that today. Then chapter 5 is taking his thoughts about research and theory and making a plan for instruction. But we don't actually have a lot of data about particular instructional sequences. So that, I think, is an unknown question. So some of you are asking, well, for instance, why would you put phonemes in front of a 4-year-old? Well, There's definitely a lot of people that think that that's not doable and it's developmentally inappropriate. We have some more recent research that shows that they can handle it. So this is not completely solid finding yet, because they're just preliminary research articles, but it's not proven that we do A, B, C, D like one program or another program in a set sequence. We still need to be really interrogating the science of instruction, as Mark Seidenberg has been saying. That's a big topic yet to be discovered. We do know the science of reading, how kids learn to read. We don't have as much slam dunk. We don't have as much of a slam dunk case for the minutia of all the steps along the way. And so you'll see a lot of different programs that have different patterns. And so go to what you know about the theory and research about what kids need and what they can handle and what may seem efficient. And those are the things that may guide you to make your decision. But don't feel as if you or I or anyone is particularly in the right. We don't know this from a science perspective yet. I feel strongly about some of the things that I've experienced because I know some science that backs up some of the features of the instruction that I give, and because of my own experience and other teachers' experience. But I'm still much more confident to say I know the route to becoming a good reader is to go through sound-based decoding. This is one way to do that. There are other ways. Let's keep pushing that question and not confuse the information that we do know very solidly with the things that we're still in the early stages of learning, particularly in light of the reading wars that we've had. This is my little soapbox, and I'll wrap up. The systematic phonics was kind of brought on, we've been battling against whole language, which morphed into balanced literacy. And we've felt like we have the research science-based upper hand, and indeed we do in terms of how kids learn to read. But we don't have lots of studies that said this program versus this program, this particular progression of letter sound knowledge versus this particular progression of letter sound knowledge. All of the curriculum choices, we don't have that data yet. We know some things. Like I said, we've seen examples of pre-K kids linking letter sounds and phonemic awareness, but even though that goes against what's mainstream practice. So we're going to learn more, but we should be gracious to one another about what some people do or what some other people do. If it can be backed with a theory of how kids learn to read in general, and we don't know for sure yet whether A is better than B, then let's not fight and draw more battle lines. Okay? Soapbox it. Yeah. All right. So I've taken a lot of your time. You guys have been awesome. I will try to do my best to help fill out the things that I missed in the comments. And if I misspoke or you want to correct me, feel free to do that as well in the comments. And it's been a treat, and thank you, Donna, and other leaders who got this started, because this is a great idea. Let's get this book out into more teachers' hands. Let's get the ideas out into more people's hands, and more people's minds, that visual memory is not how we learn to read. And when we teach kids the sound-based decoding approach, drawing their attention to sounds and words, that phonemic awareness at a high level, then more and more kids will learn to read. And if you haven't bought his other book yet, I highly recommend it. It will give you even a richer understanding and amaze you at the power of the research. So thanks, everybody, and I look forward to the next few chapters. Happy Memorial Day.